Hello and welcome back around the Bonfire. It is the show that isn't sure if any soccer was played in any country in the world. Certainly not the United States and England yesterday. I don't remember it happening. I'm here with Tim. Tim, do you remember any games yesterday? Because I can't say that I do, unfortunately.
I don't know, but when there's no fans and all of it's just a monopoly scheme to try to ruin the sport for everyone, it's really kind of hard to tell sometimes.
Well, Tim, they're not trying to ruin the sport. What they're trying to do is ruin the national team by purchasing young players and forcing them to play here against their will. Don't you know that Don Garber has that blackmail on everybody? This is very obvious, man. Come on.
Yeah, I completely forgot that the entire hopes of the U.S. men's national team program were resting on Paxton Aronson at 21 years old and his 4 caps.
Well, you have to wonder, how does this influence the everybody else of it all of these 20-year-olds who will definitely be mainstays at the World Cup next year. But we say all that to say it is maybe not a joy to be back given the circumstances, but we're excited to be here and happy you're joining us as we gather around the bonfire to talk a little bit of Chicago Fire football. Obviously, a disappointing match day +1 as the Fire fall 4-0 to Philadelphia Union last night in Chester, Cheez-It, whatever they call it out there, their little stadium on the river. An unfortunate result for the Fire. Quick recap, as we don't really have any news to get into today. Shockingly enough, nothing has broken in the last 2 days. Quick recap. Barabo opens the scoring off a pretty wonderful assist from Kai Wagner, if we're being fair. Cups falls asleep at the near post, and he loses the golden boot. Well, actually, not the golden boot leader anymore. Lionel Messi has turned on the goal scoring, but golden boot favorite early in the season.
Contender,
16 goals, having a great year.
A significant goal scorer. A guy that you really should maybe have somebody keeping track of.
One of the best 9s in MLS. I don't think that's an outrageous claim to make. Kai Wagner adds a second after halftime on a pretty wonderful free kick. Not much to be done about it, unfortunately, for the Fire. Danley Jean-Jacques puts away the third after a bit of miscommunication and breakdown in the box. And Milan Olaski, fresh off of his joining from San Diego FC, bags the dagger after Cups and others fail to clear. Hard to blame Christopher for that. That was just a defensive breakdown in all manners. Pretty disappointing night for the Fire overall. Tim, I'll kind of toss to you on big picture as it is, unfortunately, just the two of us today. No Alan, no DJ. Shout out them, even though they're not here. Big picture, how are we feeling coming off that 4-0 loss?
Look, I think that it's certainly the worst performance that the Fire put in since the 7-2 loss to Nashville back in May. And I think in a lot of ways, we were talking about this a little bit beforehand. I think it's worse. Speaking after the game, Greg Berhalter said that he thought that it was the worst performance of the season. He said it's the most disappointed that we, I think, meaning the coaching staff collectively, have been with this group this year. And I think that's saying a lot. They did not show up to play from the opening kickoff, and I guess lucky, I think, is the way that I'd say it. Like, lucky that they were down 1-0 at half, and you're maybe thinking stuff changes in the second half, and it did, but not enough, and not the way that the Fire needed.
Absolutely. We've talked about mentality at length this year, and this was, unfortunately, I think, another chapter in that same book. You look at the stats, it says it pretty well. It was a pretty even split possession-wise, but 2.39 expected goals for Philly, so they did slightly overperform, but that's not an insane amount. And then 0.21 expected goals for the Fire, which from, a side that we've said has the best attack in MLS is a little bit ridiculous, right? It's disappointing, to say the least. 7 total shots, only 2 on target. They did have 4 corners in this game, so that was good, but never really took a chance to make something out of it. One of those shots on target was Sergio Orahel putting in a rocket from outside the box, which a great look from Sergio, would have been an awesome goal, but also may not have moved the needle, even though the game was still 1-0 at that point. Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, this was all Philly all the time. This was not, even when the Fire were playing well, they were not in this game.
I don't want to say that they were not in the game at that point, right? And Greg talked about this afterwards, and he did, he made no excuses, and he was clearly upset with the result and the performance. But he said, look, here's a quote. I think there's a key moment when we had a chance and we hit the post, right? And it's 1-0, and when the goal goes in, the game changes. And it didn't, and that's the nature of the game, and we know that. it still doesn't take away from the fact that we are bitterly disappointed with our performance. And even if we would have gotten something out of that game, that performance wasn't nearly good enough. And I think that's a good way of summarizing it. I do think the Fire came out better in the second half. And did they come out well enough to deserve a result, like a draw even? No, I mean, I don't think they did, right? And I think that after the second goal goes in, I think at that point it's just it is what it is, right? Like there's some games that you lose by a certain scoreline or you win by a certain scoreline and you don't necessarily think that it represents the game you saw. I look at 4-0 and like you're a little bit surprised maybe that it was only one goal in the first half and the Fire were in it as long as they were and all that. But 4-0, it felt like a 4-0 game to me, right? And like, you talked about one stat, like here's some others. Passes into the final third, Philly almost had triple the number of the Fire, 45-17 passes within the final third. And remember, Philly's a quick counter team. They don't really want to be doing a bunch of passing and anywhere, let alone like final third. 118-36 passes into the opposition box, 15-6. I mean, and like the Union led on. They had more. They had more recoveries. They were just quicker to every ball. They had twice as many block passes as the Fire. They had more tackles. Like the only things that the Fire were ahead in are stuff like clearances, where it's like, yeah,
of course
Union couldn't have had that many clearances because the Fire weren't there doing that enough to make that happen.
Yeah, and you made an interesting point there, Tim. Like Philly is a quick counter team, and the one thing I want to point out, if you were unable to watch the game, or if you were and are maybe wondering what you were seeing, like this was not Philly dominating possession. It was 52-48, so it's about even. This was the Fire unable to actually hold possession of the ball. Philly would win it back in the attacking half and immediately go to work. I mean, this wasn't like they were playing with their food. I made a comment to you when we were talking about it, like towards the end of the first half, like, man, they will not stop shooting from outside the box. And you can say that maybe that opportunity is there. I don't think it is on a guy like Chris Brady, but I think I said to you at the time, like, if they just take these into the box, if they carry the ball, if they pass a little bit more, like, they're going to start scoring goals. And then in the second half, what did we see? I mean, the Kai Wagner free kick was just a great free kick. But those last two goals were just kind of continuing to drive and continuing to push as opposed to pulling up from deep range. And to your point there,
I will say, Philly did have 12 shots in the Fire's box. And the Fire had 7 shots in total. So it's not like they weren't doing that too. They were just, and again, that just, I think, says the story of this game of like, they just gave the Fire no oxygen and they were beating them everywhere in every stretch of the pitch. Like if you look at like a possession heat map, like the Fire's only place that they had possession was in Chris Brady's box, and like a slight area that was a little bit less than 50-50 for the Union right in front of that. And like, that just isn't enough. They smothered the Fire everywhere. Like when the Fire had the ball, it was 3 guys on whoever had the ball in the midfield. They were winning second balls at an insane rate compared to what the Fire were doing. If you told me that no one on the Fire's entire roster got any sleep at all the night before, I don't think that fully explains it, but I would not be surprised just based on the performance. Like it was that bad. It's like these guys just like looked exhausted and like they just rolled out of bed and onto the pitch, not even knowing who their opponent was, because I think that Philly did exactly the kinds of things that you expect them to do. Like that organization for a decade has been, they will come after you, they will smother you, they will be really fast on every loose ball, they will jump on everything in the air. Like they were just doing all those things at a pace that the Fire were utterly unprepared for.
No, absolutely. And look, a couple lineup notes, right? You did have Christopher Copps making his return to the starting 11. And as I go to say that, like Leonard Barroso starting next to him, of course, the midfield was unchanged, the forwards were unchanged. Like this wasn't an out of the world. So how should I say this? There's a little bit of roster turnover right now, right? Joe Waterman hasn't joined. Andre Franco did come off the bench. Frank said after the game he was probably good for about 20 minutes, ended up playing more than that. And you do say, okay, there's going to be a little bit of flux here, especially in that back line. Losing Carlos Terran and not having Waterman in yet does hurt. I don't think that you or I would have expected the drop-off to be that significant in terms of Christopher Copps to Carlos Terran. And it kind of makes you question, like, what was the training like this week where the Fire at times were so spread so wide. It was like, well, of course you can't get the pass across. You're 20 yards from the nearest person, and there's 3 Philly defenders between you, right? It's not feasible in a lot of ways.
So, statistically speaking, I know I've talked about this metric a lot. It's my favorite single number to talk about a performance. It doesn't tell you everything, and a number can be misleading depending on the situation. But American Soccer Analysis goals added metric. Mm-hmm. Christopher Cubs had the second highest, second best performance for the Fire on the evening, behind Brian Gutierrez. And when you think about like what he was doing that would have caused that number to go up, every action on the ball, defensive or offensive, that helps contribute, either adds or subtracts from that number. He was breaking up some plays into the box. He was getting some clearances and stuff like that, and that was enough to make it the second best performance. So it was a middling performance. Jack Elliott, I think, was really poor. It was statistically his worst performance in a Fire uniform using that same metric, and he was the worst outfield player on the squad. I don't read a ton into that. This is one of those things where the numbers can be misleading, I think, because I think part of it was the assignment that Jack Elliott was given. We saw him playing the game differently than Cups was, and Cups was not exactly doing the role that Tehran had. It does make me wonder, was there a real hope that they would have Waterman in for a day or two of training, and then it's like, okay, well, here, play against the Philadelphia Union for whatever, like the 15th, 20th time in your career, right? And like as a center back, you don't necessarily need like that much advanced tactical instruction as long as you kind of get the principles down and whatever. That just doesn't excuse it though, right?
No.
And in terms of why the Fire were spaced out like that, I think that was part of the game plan. I think that they were trying to stretch the Union, knowing that they pressed so much that to try to pull them out of position that there'd be somebody free. It just absolutely didn't work. And I think a little part of that is just like, I don't know why it's taken teams to catch on to this, but like, Philip Zinkernagel is a pretty good soccer player in this league. And that means that a lot of the attack ends up getting run through him one way or the other. And so, look, you put a triangle around him and you cut him off from every direction and have one guy close in and force him to have to make a decision before the pass, like to the guy that's supposed to be receiving the pass or whatever's into the place that you need them to be. And you're going to have like, you're not going to generate much possession. Like you're not going to let the Fire generate much possession. He has to make a quick choice. And it's like a hospital ball or something. And we saw that like the ball would like get to Brian Gutierrez and would bounce up on him or somebody else, like not just that he was the only one. And it just took him more or less out of the game. He was anonymous the entire match.
Yeah. And I mean, to be, in that favor, like Greg Berhalter kind of admitted as such, right? Not in any words, but in his moves when we talk about substitutions, right? Zinkernagel coming off in the 69th minute from Marin Haile Selassie. Granted, that was one of the better games we've seen from Jonathan Bamba in terms of what he brought onto the field, but you're down, I think at that point, 2 goals, maybe 3, because Jean-Jacques had just scored. You don't normally take off your best attacking players in the 69th minute down 3 goals, right? If you still think you have a shot at winning.
Yeah. And I mean, like by that point, I think that it had been enough of the match to sort of know that there wasn't. I asked Berhalter about the timing of the substitutions after the match, because it did feel like, look, the way that first half went, like, I would be looking to make as many changes as I could.
Agreed.
The only change was taking off Leonardo Barroso, who was having not a good night. I think it's fair to say, and probably polite to him.
His
for Jonathan
worst
Dean
game in a Fire shirt, I think is fair.
Yeah, I mean, and certainly the worst game that we've seen from him in a while, because he was getting beat defensively. He wasn't getting anything going forward. And again, like the going forward part is like a team thing, right? Like it's not an individual match for anybody. But what Berhalter said at the time was like, look, at this point of the season, some guys have built up some credit with us, right? And so you don't want to just yank a guy because they're having a bad performance, because I think the implication is you sort of think if you talk to them, they can improve their performance in the second half. And we saw that from a number of guys, right? Mm-hmm. Not night and day, but like we saw guys, I think, responding to whatever the second half talk was. And then he pointed out, like, look, Franco had limited minutes and there were, there's not a lot of options there. We talked about the Fire's window. I am a little bit surprised that one of the that there wasn't any movement to get a striker somewhere in the depth chart a little bit ahead of
Mhm.
what they've got right now. Like no offense to Tom Barlow, but like he strikes me as a very good third option in a depth chart in MLS. He does not strike me as a very convincing second option.
He is a little too much role player where you need score, right? Tom Barlow is, I think, and you might agree with this, Tim. Like for his cost, especially, like is a valuable piece to have on an MLS roster. Of like you do need a forward who can press and who can run tirelessly. Like I think there's value in that. But to your point, he's not the guy you want to have to pull off the bench in the 70th minute saying we really need a goal. Like get out there and do something for us.
Yeah, yeah. And since his time in the national team, Greg has called his subs solutions, not substitutions, and he's not someone where you're like looking for that spark late that you think, oh yeah, that guy can do it, right? And like those guys don't all necessarily have to be like DP level players. Like there's guys that are very good at that in whatever way and for whatever reason, just like playing a role. Like Alan Gordon, who was, finished his career with the Fire, is like I think one of the classic examples of that. Like the meme about him more than anything else is like he's the guy when you need like a late goal, you take him off the bench and he somehow like wizards it into happening.
It's how Kai Kamara is still playing in this league, right? I mean, I don't know that I want Kai Kamara on the roster, but like he has a case for it, right? He has that ability when you're especially a more experienced player like that.
Yeah. So there's definitely names out there, and again, we're not saying like, oh, it'd have been great if the Fire had gotten another DP to sit on the bench while Hugo is doing it, or vice versa, right? Like there's maybe affordable options. Again, the roster's packed and you can't do everything in one or two windows, but I think that's one of the big takeaways is like that gap between the Fire and the top teams is still there. That's a point that in our 5 things that Alex made, but I don't think that the skill gap was the primary issue here. I think it was just intensity in a way that I think is pretty disappointing.
Agreed. And I think part of that, 2 things, right? One, you saw the gap between a team that I don't think either of us would be surprised to see lifting MLS Cup at the end of the year. To be frank, they might be my personal favorite because I don't know that San Diego really has that in them. But the other side of the coin, and Tim, I made this point to you last night, ironically enough, about the 5 things. I was like, hey, maybe throw this in. But like, there is an aspect of this where it did feel like a game of growing pains. You have a ton of youth in this lineup. You made the comment like, well, Brian Gutierrez was the best player on the field for the Fire. It's like, there are 4 guys younger than him out there, which is an insane thought to think, right? And I know Chris Brady had a terrible like rating on FootMob and all the sources there. I have a hard time blaming Chris Brady for anything that happened in this game.
Yeah, anytime, just to like say a beat on that, like anytime you have a performance where the team is just getting hung out to dry, the goalkeeper will have numbers that reflect that, because
it could have been 7 or 8 if Chris Brady had not been on his game yesterday.
Yeah, well, and again, like there were guys that were being like leaving. Giving Ty Baribo space in the box to get a shot off. Like, stuff like that is going to make you look bad. And it's not that you're a bad goalie. It's just that the things that need to happen to put you in a position to make the save are not happening.
100%. But to the main point, a lot of youth in the lineup, right? With the right side of that back line was an average age of 18, right? Cups at 17, Barroso at 19. And we saw early, Barroso, Cups, and Orahel all struggled in the first half. Barroso obviously was the sub at halftime. Cups and Orahel did seem to grow into the game a bit. And Tim, this is kind of a double-sider, and I added a note in here late because I think it's an interesting topic we've talked about before. First, do you feel kind of looking at this, especially a guy like Sergio Orahel, who has been starting week in, week out since February, right? To his credit, are maybe getting too much to handle here, right? Is asking Christopher Cups to start against Philadelphia Union and play 90 minutes too much? And the other side of the coin is there was no edge in that lineup last night, right? There is no guy who can go out there and kind of be the shoot, Hauser. I don't know how to say it without making Austin have to believe something, but being the guy
poop
that
houser.
kind of,
we'll just say poop housing.
Yeah. To be the poop houser out there, right? And you saw it late in the game. Kellen Acosta, like not throwing, but definitely pushing Milan Olaski to the ground outside the box, right? That's not nothing. There is an element of the game that is important there. And it does feel like against St. Louis, even though they won, and against Philadelphia, they were getting bossed all night. This is a team that doesn't really have a lot of edge in the starting 11 right now.
Yeah, I think the one guy that really has shown edge has been Brian Gutierrez. And when he shows his edge, though, it's a little too sharp and
He's
he gets sent off a lot of the time.
yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, look, this is in the 5 things, which I encourage everyone to read on MinuteRed97.com. Um, you know, talking to Alex after the presser on Thursday, he was like, this is a game that Kellen Acosta needs to start. And I listened to his argument and I'm like, I saw it. I still was like, I don't know. Like, I get it. But I thought he had a pretty good performance. Now, I asked Greg about him after the game, what he said, and I don't know why we're getting, it's either refreshing honesty or trying to send a message through the media about where Kellen really is. And I don't know. But what he basically said is like, more or less, like, I wouldn't read too much into that. And, it really is just about, like, by that point, the game was out of hand and the game state was different. And so Kellen coming fresh off the bench and all of that, like, it's not, you don't want to read too much into that level of performance from him for that many minutes. But I still think that Alex is like, look, were the Fire going to lose by more than 4-0 if Kellen Acosta had started instead of Sergio or instead of Jay, right? Like, and I think that it's hard to make the case that it would have been a worse loss.
I think for the long term, if you want to say our starting point in terms of building our lineup will always be Sergio Orhel because of what he brings in terms of his growth, in terms of his potential. I think that's super reasonable. But I think at this point in the season, you need to be willing to look at things on a very micro level and say, who gives us the best chance to win? And last night, God love him, Sergio Orhel did not give you the best chance to win. I think I don't think I'm crazy for saying that even from the outset, right? Even without knowing what we know now, part of the reason I'm excited about the acquisition of Joel Waterman is Joel Waterman will pick up a yellow card. He's okay with that. He will do what he needs to do to make sure his team isn't being bullied. And Kellen Acosta does that really well. And having a midfield of a 22-year-old, a 22-year-old, and a 19-year-old, I don't think accomplishes anything near that.
And I think that the thing is when Waterman does it, he'll be doing it strategically in the right way, or at least a lot of the time he will. It's not like he lost his mind and got a stupid yellow. And I think that, know, in a game that had a lot of cards, what I want to say, five yellows between the two teams, right? Like, I want to say that, like, the yellows that the Fire got were kind of stupid decisions, right? And the ones that, like, Sergio Orahel's, where the Union are about to take a throw and he just like knocks the ball out of the guy's hand, with his hand, like, while the ball's out of play. Like, you just, like, that's it. It's going to be a card, right? Like, it just is.
To that end, like, and I don't mean to like pick, but it is a little bit of like, in that exact same situation, if you just stand there, you're not getting a yellow for that. You're still delaying the throw in. You're going to get the ref's going to say something to you, right? He's going to wave you off, but you're buying your team another 5 seconds and you're not going to the book, right? Versus Sergio actually knocking the ball away with his hand.
And like, yeah. And like, I get the idea of like wanting to be like, hey, I'm here. Like, I can like, I have a physical presence in front of you, but like, there's a smarter way to do it. And I think that I think that a lot of the Union's yellows were smarter, more strategic, not all, but like not all of them. Like, I think that Barribos was less so, but either way, it just goes to show something that I think the team has struggled not having in the lineup. At the same time, I want to say, I really don't think that Sergio Orahel had a terrible performance in some ways. I mean, if we're averaging, grading on a curve for the team on that night, I think he had an above average performance, but I just think that that's not really saying a lot. But we've been kind of dancing around this question, though, which is that the Fire just brought in a midfielder who made its debut, and there's 3 spots in the midfield. I don't expect the Fire to start playing like a 4-4-2 or something like that and pulling out a winger to have like a box midfield or anything. So I think that there will now be another source of pressure for minutes in the midfield. And I think the question is, who is really pushing who for minutes?
It's a good question. And I think, the 2 points tie together really well, because what I was going to say is like, you have to kind of almost take it over the breath of the last 2 months, right? You can't just look at this in terms of like just this week. We're talking about a Sergio Orhel. and it does make you wonder, like Andre Franco, not like an ideal debut, of course, right? He played okay. I wasn't blown away. He made some nice passes. He made some poor passes. I think what you'd
Yeah,
expect for
and
that
like
game and that debut, right?
yeah, and coming in down 2-0 in a game where like you've had very little going forward. I think you saw some of the promise from him, right? Like I think that you saw there were times that you could see the energy that he was bringing. Like there was a restart where he was taking a free kick and he was ready to go, and it seemed like Brian Gutierrez, who had actually earned the free kick for the Fire, was sort of like milling about a little bit. I thought that was kind of an interesting second, but at the same time, you could clearly see the rust, right? Like he hasn't really played
Yeah.
any high level, competitive or preseason soccer since the 9 minutes he had in the Club World Cup in June. And I think that some of that rust showed. I think that you're hoping that the Fire find a way to shake a lot of that rust off in training over the next 2 weeks.
What I did love, I will say, Andre Franco wise, is man, the urgency, the energy. Like there was none of that, right? Until he came onto the pitch, and all of a sudden it was, you saw him caught, like it didn't work, unfortunately, but there was a moment right after he comes in where he drops real deep. He was playing more in that Orahel role than that Gutierrez role. So he's dropping into the back line, calling for the ball, saying, like screaming, hands up, hands down, like trying to get the ball, and plays a pass into Gutman. And unfortunately, like didn't connect. You can tell that's where that rust is, right? But the idea was a great idea, right? If he puts a little more on that ball, Gutman is now open coming down the left side with room in the middle to score, right? There's he sees the field well. He just needs to get back into his paces.
Fully agree. Now, I will say it is kind of interesting to me. I was thinking that what we'd be seeing is Jay Davila, probably being the guy working more as the 6. And maybe I thought it was going to be interesting to see if, I think we all assumed that Franco was coming on off the bench when it turns out he wasn't starting. I wasn't aware that he had that much of a minutes restriction, which I don't think is about coming back from injury. I think it's about just the team, like, just like trying to get him back into 90-minute fit game readiness, right?
He hasn't played 90 minutes in 3 years.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a very long time. And like playing, he could play more minutes for the Fire this season, I believe, still. No, a little bit less. He could almost match his minutes total between now and the end of the regular season that he had last year with Porto, which I think says something.
Yeah. I
just think it was interesting. Like, I was not expecting Davila to be the guy off to bring Franco on. And I think that says a little bit about what Greg was trying to do in that exact moment where, Sergio comes off 6 minutes later, but for those 6 minutes, it was a more attacking-minded group. Now, Zinkernagel had come off, Marn had come on. I think that that's something where it hadn't really been Zinkernagel's night, and he was looking pretty tired. So, like, and Marin, I think, he is a guy that you think can provide something off the bench in terms of an offensive spark and all.
100%.
And so I think it was Greg trying to maybe change realizing that it was not likely to work, but change the result and get something going forward. Because if you get one goal in that minute, you've got whatever, like 20, 15, 17, whatever, like 12, 5 minutes stoppage time to get an equalizer. And then you've salvaged something, right?
Yeah.
Didn't work, obviously, but I think that was the thinking. I don't expect Franco to typically be the guy giving, or I don't think that Davila and Franco are really the guys primarily in competition with each other.
Yeah. And I don't, to your original point about where do the minutes come, right? To be candid, like, don't see a huge competition from Franco right now. Maybe when you get to playoffs and he's had 2 months to fully work himself up to fitness, like, you could see that. But at that point, it's like, you're kind of already in your rhythms. I do think for 2025, he is probably a bench guy. And then it's more, like you said right there, about game state. And the interesting thing to me was, like, he's playing very deep. He is not, how do I phrase it? Like, he is not moving forward the way Brian Gutierrez does. He's dropping deep and distributing the ball, which I think does bring a really interesting aspect to the field for the Fire late in the game of, like, you have a guy who can deliver those long passes. Like, that's not something that's really on the field right now. But to your point, like, it does certainly hinder you. And I think we saw that late when you don't have a 6 on the field and you have both fullbacks pushing forward and you're deeper midfielder is a guy like Franco who, and right now it's Rust, but you have to think long term, like that's not your best defensive option in midfield either.
Yeah, I mean, and I think I suspect that we will see Franco playing further up in most situations. I think part of this was game state and part of it was some other stuff. I know Kellen Acosta's, he's told me he thinks of himself more as like an 8. I think of him more as an option as a 6. And again, Greg was sort of dismissing the idea that the 15 minutes plus stoppage that we saw from him against the Union is really going to be something that's going to weigh heavily into earning him more minutes. Although I think it was a decent outing off the bench in that situation. But like, I suspect, I do really think, like, look, you don't bring a guy in from loan. You have to evaluate how he's going to do for this season and next season. The Fire have to try to get wins to make the postseason. I get all of that. I think that there's a reasonable chance we could see him start for at least a game or two. And my suspicion would be that it's going to be for Orahel at this point. I think Gutierrez is maybe, like, I think that maybe there's a real possibility that the push is there as well, where it's, if Guti isn't playing well, then it's like, hey, don't worry. Like, we got a guy that can play that too. Guti has had 2 of his best games in the year in the past 2 games. And if he keeps that up, like, he's just going to be untouchable, to take out of the lineup unless something unfortunate happens, like he gets injured.
No, I agree completely. And I am interested to see, with that more dropping Davila, excuse me, and pushing Franco and Gutierrez for it. I'm curious to see what that could look like. I think in the immediate turnaround, I would kind of say, unfortunately, I know Greg may not want to say it or admit it, but I don't know how Kellen Acosta doesn't give you a better chance to win games than Sergio Orahel right now. Right now being the very key phrase there.
Well, I think that what we've seen is that the Fire have done better when it is Orahel in the lineup and not Acosta, and I think that move has happened for a reason. I think that they play very different games. I will say that even in the 15 minutes plus stoppage we saw from Kellen, he looked noticeably slower than the Kellen that I remember, and slower even against a lot of tired legs out there after the way that the Union and the Fire, frankly, had been kind of like running around in that one. I don't know. Like, I had hoped that this would be a banner year for Kellen. It obviously hasn't been. And every single time I bring him up, Greg, or not just me, but like any of the other reporters that have talked to him about it, it's this has been a tough season for him. It's difficult for him to adapt to the role that he's being asked, meaning a role off the bench. And like, that's, again, it seems, I don't know if there's something going on behind the scenes there. I don't know if they're trying to send a message that, like, look, you should be, working to help us work with you to make a trade that you want happen or anything like that. But it's, again, it seems like so far Greg's story hasn't changed, which is that we should keep on seeing Kellen used going forward the way that we've seen from him so far. Even though, as I said, like, I was overall impressed with his performance. And I think that there's a very good argument that Alex made that he should have started in this one.
Yeah, I do think the first game of the year, somebody made the comment to me, like, my biggest concern with Greg is, like, changes. Do we make changes? Is he flexible? And I wonder right now, is the rigidity getting to you a little bit, right? I agree, like, even if you think moving forward, and I do, Sergio Orahel is the best option in midfield, maybe Andre Franco at some point this year. I think in the micro, you need to be willing to look at a game and say, Sergio's profile does not make sense here. You need the grit that Kellen Acosta brings. You need whatever it is, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, especially it's the Union, right? Like we said, like, I don't know if you heard this, like, that every touch that Elliott had, especially early on, he was getting booed by everyone in the crowd, right? He was really liked by a lot of the fan base there. Like, it's this city that booed Santa, right? Like, it's, and that is just a big part of it. Like, everyone in that city likes crap talking. The way that, like, you hear guys that going back to like Jim Curtin's era and like that of the way that they played soccer, it's like, oh, we just thought the game was mostly about kicking shins, and if you got some of the ball too, then that was a positive. Like, and like, that's still the way the Union play. They did not try to change the DNA of the city with the system that team has, with all that they've invested in the academy and everything else.
Yeah, well, look, we said this from the first matchup, like, even in a what we thought would be an off year for Philly, like, they're one of the best organizations in MLS, right? They are, if you're an American football fan, they are the Philadelphia Eagles. Like they are like they. I mean, it's hard to look at them and say they're not when they've done what they've done with the budget that they have, right? Or the
Yeah, and
budget
I think that
they
it's the
use.
budget that you're looking at too. It's the commitment to spending more. When they have been so close, it seems to being one or two pieces away from a lot of hardware. And I think that, God, I can't believe I'm bringing up the Paxton Aronson thing again. I do sort of wonder from a USMNT pool perspective how much it may have affected the quality of the pool and the players going forward. That two of the strongest academies in MLS have been the New York Red Bulls and the Philadelphia Union, and they both kind of play anti soccer, like quick counter possession. We don't want the ball. When you need to be able to play with the ball, especially in certain situations, to I don't know, make it through CONCACAF World Cup qualifying when that's a thing you've got to do because you're not hosting. But that's a completely different story.
Yeah. But point is, I say all that to say, like, you have this well-run Oregon MLS who has a lot of success, maybe not reached the mountaintop quite yet. But then, Tim, we haven't even talked about this. You add the guy who decoded MLS, right? Like, you add Bradley Carnell. He could win MLS with a second Bundesliga side, I bet, personally. Sorry, I had to work that in.
Because of the tactical instruction they've received.
Yeah.
Not because of the quality. Yeah, I mean that, and you add Milan Olowski, who is just like an absolute goals per 90 wizard. Like it's insane what the guy's been doing. Like he's
there. Yeah, I mean Philadelphia. Like I said, if I were picking favorites today, I don't know that they're number one, but they are very, very close to the top.
No, they're a very good team, and it would not be surprising. Again, it's really impressive what they've done. I think when I was saying they're not one of the top teams or organizations in MLS, I think it's that willingness to commit more about to spending at the level. Yeah, exactly. They have been the team that has. I believe that if this season goes the way it looks like it could for the Union, they will be the team that has the most points in MLS this decade. And I think the only team that's really in contention around them is LAFC.
Yeah. Kind of brings us to a non-Philadelphia Union-centric point. The Fire scheduled to take on Inter Miami next week, but Inter Miami will be playing in the League's Cup semifinals. So the Fire now have an impromptu bye, which means they will play midweek later on in the year. September 30th is the date of that game. So an exact 1 month delay, even though that's a Tuesday, ironically enough. We're going to kind of talk a little bit of big picture. Tim, I guess I'll kind of give both sides the coin, and then I'm curious your thoughts. Do we feel like this is coming at the best or the worst time? When we're thinking best, it is you're coming off a terrible loss, right? It's maybe the worst possible outcome. Not only do you lose, you now don't have the goal differential tiebreaker with New York Red Bull. So unless the Red Bull lose by more than 3 today, the Fire are out of the playoff picture through at least next week, which is not the end of the world, but doesn't feel good to sit on that. And now you have 2 games in hand as opposed to a single game in hand. I do think it's poor to sit on, right? You want to get a new game in the books as quickly as possible so that you can get this taste out of your mouth. The pros, you have an extra week without a match to work in Joel Waterman, to work in Andre Franco, get his fitness up. You have that extra game in hand now. And Miami, we saw them resting guys against DC last night, if I am not misremembering. Their schedule congestion is terrible. So the idea that you're getting them midweek at home, I don't think is a terrible thing for the Fire.
Yeah, I mean, I think you take it, right? The one thing I will push back on is the Fire not out of the playoff picture. They may not be in 9th place or 10th place or whatever.
Out of playoff spot.
Yeah, they may be out of a playoff spot. I mean, they will have, had 1 or 2 games on hand against the teams that are relevant in this discussion. I just think you don't worry about that too much. And in terms of if it's better or worse, Greg has previously said he sort of likes the goldfish thing of just being able to get back on the pitch and just getting a result as quickly as possible afterwards. That was sort of the message that he had after the loss to Minnesota United in the US Open Cup quarterfinals. And then the Fire played San Diego 4 days later. I will say that it was a tough loss against San Diego, although by a smaller margin. So not sure that really worked out for the team, but I just think you take it, right? It's an opportunity to rest up, to get, some guys ready. I don't know how many minutes Franco will be ready for in 2 weeks versus what he'd have next week. to get Waterman in and integrated, like to get, hopefully Radojevic just in and ready to at least be a valid option for minutes off the bench for Gutman, who's played like 20,000 minutes for the Fire this year.
Yeah.
You just take the gift that's given to you, right? And I think like, and I was thinking about this. My gut feeling is this was not the kind of performance the Fire can have again this year, right? Like,
no,
it's the kind of performance that like you're like teams that play like that, regardless of the result. Like maybe you're not going to be the Union, like whatever. You can't have performances like that where you come out like that and expect to make the playoffs. Like it doesn't feel like that team deserves to be in the playoffs based on the way they played. And you want maybe for that to sit with you for a little bit and to kind of like let the stench of the loss kind of like seep into the guys, clothes and whatever before washing it away and getting back on the pitch. And they've got time to let that happen and still extra time to train ahead of a very winnable game against the Revs coming up next.
100%. And that was kind of, I think I agree with you, Tim. It is, I think it's a provided the coaching staff is able to put in a little bit of gumption. I don't know if that's the right word, right? But like, provided that the coaching staff is able to give them a little bit of a swift kick in the rear, because you look at what's coming up here. We talked about the Inter Miami game and how like, oh, maybe that'll actually be a benefit for the Fire. You go New England at home, NYCFC at home, Minnesota away, Columbus at home. There's one win. There's one, I don't want to say slam dunk because you don't want to be rude to the New England Revolution, but there's one game that you should without a doubt win. Those other three are, winnable games, I think all three of them, but not givens. You've already lost away at Minnesota this year. Columbus kind of ragdolled you early in the year. And NYCFC, I think the Fire are the better team. I think we would have seen them win in New York, but there's not that could go just as poorly as the first one did, I guess, for lack of a better word. So you could very well find yourself playing in Miami, not out of the playoff picture, but in a much worse position.
Yeah, and I think what you don't want, look, the Revs, just their whole DNA, like they're more than happy to play spoiler. Long-term Fire fans have a lot of memories of the Revs being spoilers for the Fire in different situations. What you don't want is the Fire to be in a situation where they need to win away at Foxborough on turf on decision day to make it into the postseason, right? Now, again, like in terms of them playing spoiler, last night from when we're recording, the Crew fell to the Revs 2-1 in a game played in Columbus. And so look, the Crew have kind of not been at their peak form for a while now. And so like that I know was like the hard game. And I think on paper, it's still one of the hardest games the Fire have left. But I think that the last time that Columbus won a league match may have actually been back on like the middle of July when they beat DC United 2-1 in a game where, it wasn't until the 89th minute, but like still they had a penalty early and DC went down a man late. So like
you will also have like Osama Abu Ali like fully integrated to the squad though, right? You expect him to be starting at that point.
Yeah. And it's a team that really looked like they needed a really good goal scoring number 9, and they got what looks like a really good goal scoring number 9. So that's a factor too. But like again, I think we'll just have you just have to take the opponents in front of you. There's enough winnable 100%. Games ahead for the Fire, but I think either way, you just do not want to see a single game like this. Like it's statistically sure every point is a point that you kind of need and all of that, but like realistically, the Fire will probably be okay if they put together performances that are pretty strong, and I think they'll just get the results. I think they're a good enough team to. But like one more result, like not result, like one more performance like this, and it just is like, what are you even doing?
100%. 100%. Well said. And before we wrap here, we'll do a little bit of a programming note. Obviously, as we've said, Chicago Fire off this week, so there will not be a preview episode this weekend. But in the effort of still providing something of value, if nothing else, to ourselves, would expect to see early next week. So on our normal schedule, Monday, we'll be giving you a little bit of a playoff preview. So we're going to talk the state of the Eastern Conference, where the Fire sit in it, and how that actually will break down in these remaining 7 games or so, and what those matchups will look like, and how the Fire can make sure they not only claim but keep and potentially set themselves up for playoff success here. So really excited about that. I think that'll be a really interesting conversation. So like I said, no midweek episode this week as there is no Fire game, unfortunately. Obviously, if there's some kind of breaking news, you'll hear from us, but I don't know what the breaking news would be at this point in the year, unfortunately. But yeah, and then we will be back a week from this episode releasing to discuss playoff picture, as there won't be any Eastern Conference games that Sunday, so we'll be able to kind of look at the wider scope of the Eastern Conference and kind of break things down there. So I think that'll be really wonderful, really insightful episode of the pod, as it were. Tim, any last final thoughts before we wrap and get on out of here?
Yeah, I mean, everyone rest up. Have a good Labor Day, because I guess next time we're coming at you will be probably on Labor Day itself.
Yeah. There we go. And yeah, hey, enjoy your 3-day weekend without having to worry about what the Fire did. Unless you, of course, made arrangements to go down to Miami, in which case that sucks. But hey, we're going to take a positive mindset and say, now you just get to go to Miami and have fun. How about that? Anyway, I say all that to say, thank you so much for joining us here around the bonfire. As always, you can follow us on socials at Men in Red 97, at MIR97 Pods on Twitter as well. Just stay tuned to the website, meninred97.com. If you're looking for more content about the game, you had the 5 things, you had the match recap from Tim and Alex and Max, all kind of putting in some work there. So would highly recommend going and giving those a read. meninred97.com is where you can stay up to date with all Fire news. That's where all the breaking news, all the opinions that actually matter and not mine, will appear all the time. Really wonderful work from the guys up there. And yeah, thank you so much for joining us here around the bonfire. It has been a pleasure to have you. For our illustrious producer, Austin, for Tim, for Alan and DJ, who are not here with us today, thank you so much for listening, and come on, you Men in Red.